Hi, my name is Keenan. I'm a biology professor at Minnesota State University, Mankato, and I study cancer research and biology education research. And today I'm going to take you through Prism's kind of setup for dose response models. It's changed a bit in the few years, but I've been using this since 2014. So I'll kind of show you my system and feels like a good little tutorial to like kind of walk through everything and we'll kind of go from here. So if you want exactly what's kind of on here essentially is like an XY with error for each X time and treatment difference in the Ys. We can start here in XY. Down here, usually we do a single Y for every point, but I've actually got a lot of like drug replicate data, and that's typically what's going to happen in most research settings. So you can do more. Like I have a max of 9 replicates across my each treatment for me. I mean, you could technically do as many as you want. You would just have some extra space. That's fine. We'll actually see that I actually have 9 for one and 6 for the other, and it actually ends up working out fine. So in today's, we're going to set up a drug setup. These are two different cancer cell lines of the lymphoma that I study, DHL6 and U2932. I also am going to have a drug right here that is going to get set up. So for the X, what I would kind of advise as somebody who's been up to this for a while is keep your X as like raw molarity if you are doing drug trial stuff. It gets a little cranky because we're going to do a logarithm transformation in a bit. It gets a little cranky if you don't have these raw numbers in here. So I just actually kind of prefer this. I'm going to say PCAM2 is the drug that I am using, so I can label that in the X. That looks good. I have got my raw stuff here. So this, even though it's just raw molarity, this is 20 micromole, 10 micromole, down all the way down here to like 78 nanomolar, for example. So I've got group A and I've got group B. So I would take my data. What I have are relative survival proportions in this case. So out of 1.0 would indicate full survival at that metric. So for example, at the lowest dose down here, I did have a replicate where it was about, it was about 100%, like with some extra on top of survival. Now, if we go over here to U2932, I'm going to grab my data from over here and go ahead and paste that in. And notice that, yeah, I only have the 6 replicates here. I have some extra space. That's fine. But over here in group B with U2932, I'm all filled up and it looks good. So if we go over here, you are confronted with the classic and very terrifying setup right here where you see your raw data against what it looks like without being log transformed. And, some people like this. Some people graph this for what they need, things like that. But let's go ahead and get everything a little better. So if I click, what we're going to do ultimately is click transform concentrations on the X, right? In the old days of Prism, as I age myself, you can say, hey, transform your X values with one of these setups right here. And look, there's log X right there. It's still there. So we've done a transformation tutorial and it's got all this stuff. You can still do log X right there, but you do have the dedicated setup now. So what I would do is just say, hey, we've got an X value. We've got 2 Y groups with replicates. Let's transform concentrations on the X. Don't need to change anything. That's okay. You can if you are, if you're trying to change things, go nuts. Again, log 10 is our main thing that we're after. And like you saw with molarity, like that's kind of the system we're in. Okay. So now our setup is like this. We've still got the same stuff in the Y. So when we look down here, there's our ugly graph, but let's say, hey, I want a new graph actually. I don't want data 1. I want my transform of the X of data 1. So on the plot, you can technically say like, hey, I want to show the median. I want to show the mean. Um, you can choose here. Mean's fine. I'm going to say, oh, I mean an error. Standard deviation is tougher when I only have, 6, for example. You can do SEM at these lower population levels, again, or 95% confidence interval, or if you want to have like kind of a bigger setup, you can do just full on range. For just keeping things a little normal, let's just keep it at standard dev right here. It's not technically going to change much other than how it looks in this case for us. But speaking of how it looks, much better. We can start to see this nice curve coming down here, things like that. I could say, for example, this is my PKM2 right here. I'm going to say relative cell viability survival. I'm going to come in here in a bit later and color these in. As you can tell, there's some moderate differences between these two cell lines and their responses, but let's actually kind of see if we can get this curve kind of lit up here. And equally, So what we're gonna do, well, actually, you know what? I am actually gonna take advantage of this. First thing I'm gonna do is actually change these to get a little bigger for us so that so let's say we make everything white. There we go. But now let's say I'm gonna make DHL6. I want to have this nice fun teal color. I'll kind of match with that, and then let's do U2932. Let's call it kind of this purple right here. Nice. Okay, not bad. So now we've got some decent colors. So now you can kind of visualize things a little better. It's doing really well with our error bar. You can see where like there's dose separations. You can see certain treatments that were a little fussier, for example, that you may want to look into. But again, across 9 treatments, not bad, with 9 replicates in each in some cases. Now, I do want to fit this to an actual curve. What you're going to do is head towards XY analyses. This is going to ask you to say, hey, I want to do a nonlinear regression. I want to do a curve fit. This is actually going to take you to one of the old mega menus like this, okay? Now, given what I'm up to, and what I want you to ultimately do is kind of experiment with which curves work best for you, things like that. But again, following the standard setup, I've got a dose response within an inhibition drug, okay? Log inhibitor response versus my variable slope, all right? This looks good, and this is pretty decent for relative data, right? Go ahead and click OK on this, and you don't need to change much. And there we go. We've actually got a pretty decent little setup right here. I mean, if I want, I can go ahead and say like, hey, now that I've got this curve right here, pretty sure this is my DHL6. Why don't I can match this and make sure that my curve is kind of matching color like that. But technically you can change the curve colors on your own. So again, now that we're at this point, I want to spend some time over here. I want to get in some axes right here. Ooh, come back here. There we go. And if you've followed the tutorials with me, you know that I love a good few changes to my axes, get some tick marks in there, left, right axis right here. 150% cell alive is a little much. Maybe we'll say like 1.3. So sometimes like some of those lower doses do cause the cell lines to go upwards strangely. Go up by these. I don't think I need too many tick marks, but like you know me, I kind of like tick marks. All right, so now that we're looking pretty decent like this, that's great. We can go ahead and go over here and say, hey, how are things looking? What are the sum of my squares? What's my R squared technically? Because remember, this is technically a regression of its own. Things like that, sum of squares, pretty good data right here. You do have, for example, another like 95% confidence interval, especially for like this value down here is what you might want to be looking at. IC50. IC50 is essentially like, hey, what amount of your dose of your X killed about 50%? This sometimes changes with ED50 if you're for effective dose. Kind of depends on what you're after, but these numbers can help. What is going on technically right here, though, is that if we take a look at our graph, this is really good looking. This is what I would use to say like, hey, I'm going to put this on my poster. Technically, though, even though you do have some good values right here that like really are close to 1.0 and really close to 0. So I would say like these data right here are really good actually for that IC50 value. But technically, if you don't tell it, it's just going to take where's the 50% inhibition in the curve itself. So let's say that this value right here was actually closer to 80 and this like the max value only killed like 20% were still alive. It would actually only get like the middle of that, or let's say this was 10. So it would be uneven. It wouldn't actually be the 50% that we want right there, for example, right? So I'm going to go ahead and do one more little trick for us. You're going to go back. You're going to go to nonlinear regression, make a new results sheet. Everything's fine. Now, you would not actually put this in the published version, but what you can say is like, hey, repeat my setup. I got my 4 parameters. Perfect. But now I'm going to say this test has got to equal. The bottom is 0. The top must be that 1.0, that fully survived setup. Now you can change a ton of other good stuff in here depending on like what you need. You can add like I said, your confidence stuff. You can ask for more data, normality, things like that. But again, the constrained setup right here, this is going to force it to say when it gives me that IC50, it is going to give me the exact one that's going to be at that 50 line right there. Now, if we go down to here, now bottom and top constrained, perfect. This is a value that we're going to want to trust right there. Now, given our data was actually pretty clean in this case, oh, not that one, remember. It's actually probably pretty close to what it is. But see this black line that we just added, since we didn't like do any aesthetics for that, that's when it is forced to go through 1.0 and like kind of end at 0, at least for its analyses, to say the exact middle of that will be 0.50 survival. Now, in this case, I would usually grab that data and then I would get rid of, for example, I do not want to have like the second curve in there, I would say. So this is what I would say you would want, like just for your poster, for example. So given that, I suppose there are a couple other things you can do with XY, for example. Sometimes I've seen people say like, hey, what's the area under a curve for two drugs? And you can say like, hey, total area under this U2932 is a lot higher. And if we go down here, you can see that U2932 does not, there's more left alive essentially. See how that area under the curve is still a little thicker. The DHL6 and teal, they actually end up dying pretty hard down here. So you would say like, oh, there are more living cells like in the overall sense with U2932 still. But in that case, in most cases, the EC or IC50 value is what you're probably going to be comparing with, but it is a neat function and it is kind of helpful to get something across. So thank you so much for listening and tune in next time.